Hey A&Pers, this is Dr. Jones checking in. This is A&P 1, Lecture Test 2, and we're on video 4. Video 4. I'll write this down before I forget. So we're starting the note set at the top of page 6, which for me looks like this, right here. And we are talking about the anatomical directions. Again, this is part of the material that is also in the lab list. These are all lab list terms, and during the normal semester we don't have time to cover these in lecture. So this is a bonus lecture that you would not normally get in lecture. So, let's see, I am in the way. Here we go. Okay, so the term superior means towards the top, inferior is towards the bottom. Okay, towards the head, towards the feet. Cranial or cephalic is towards the head, which in a human is the same as superior. Caudal means towards the tail or towards the bum, which again in human is going to be inferior if you're above the tail. In a quadruped, these would be different. And do we have a picture? Do we have a picture of the cat? No, we don't have the picture of the cat. Okay. So in a cat, all right, I cannot draw, so give me a break here. If it's got pointy ears, that makes it a cat, right? Nose. All right. And we'll give it a tail. There you go. See, it doesn't look like a cat. Okay, so caudal in a cat would be towards the tail and towards the head is cranial. So you can see how it's different for a human than for a quadruped. We are bipedal, ped means foot, and we have 2 of them. Cats, most mammals are quadrupeds. Quad means 4 because they have 4 feet. Okay, quadruped. All right, caudal's towards the tail. Anterior is towards the front. Anterior in a human is the same as ventral. So ventral is also ventral is technically towards the tummy. Posterior is towards the back, and dorsal is towards the spine. So on a human, a bipedal organism, anterior and ventral are the same, and posterior and dorsal are the same. So let's look at our cat. Anterior is towards the front, and posterior is towards the back. So these will be the same as cranial and caudal. And then ventral is towards the tummy, ventral, and dorsal is towards the spine. So ventral will be inferior in a quadruped, and dorsal will be superior in a quadruped. So in a human, we can use anterior and ventral interchangeably. Just understand that that's only for in the human organism. Okay. Medial is towards the midline. So here's the midline right down through the nose. Medial is towards the midline, and lateral is away from the midline. So the lateral are the sides, away from the middle. Proximal is closer to the attachment of the limb. So proximal will largely be used for the upper and lower limb. We will find it in some other places also. But largely it means towards the attachment of the limb because it has proximity, like a proximity alarm on your car goes off when someone gets too close, and it specifically touches the car. Okay, and then distal is away from the attachment of the limb. I like to use distal as towards the digits because the digits are away from the attachment of the limb. So proximal, distal. And then superficial is closer to the surface of the skin. I don't think I have a picture of that here. And then deep is further from the surface of the skin. So let's talk about these terms. Let's talk about your elbow. So your elbow compared to your shoulder is what? So we're not drawing a map here. We're not saying from the shoulder to the elbow. We're saying the elbow is what when you compare it to the shoulder. And compared to the shoulder, the elbow is distal. It's towards the digits. So what is the elbow compared to the wrist? Compared to the wrist, and again, we're not drawing a map. We're not saying we start at the elbow and we go to the wrist. We're saying what is the elbow and use the term that compares it to the wrist. So from the wrist, the elbow is proximal. I can't quite get on the screen there, but proximal because the elbow is closer to the attachment of the limb than the wrist is. So the elbow is proximal to the wrist and distal to the shoulder at the same time. Okay, so these anatomical directions aren't absolutes, they are comparative terms. So in all of these questions about the anatomical directions, it'll be, what is A? A is what compared to B? It'll be like that. A is what compared to B. That's how it'll be on the lab test. Lecture test will be similar, but there'll be more words. Okay, so all of it's relative. The top of your head is as superior as you get. The plantar region at the bottom of your feet is as inferior as you get. The midline is, belly button is as medial as you get. The edges of your thumbs are as lateral as you get. The skin, the surface of the skin is as superficial as you get. Like, there are a few spots that are absolutes, but everything else is relative. So let's talk about like the humerus here, which is the bone down the middle of the arm, and then the bicep sits on top of that under the skin. So the biceps brachii is what compared to the skin? Which of these terms match? The biceps is deep to the skin because the skin is superficial. It's the most superficial part of your body. The skin's always superficial. The biceps brachii is what compared to your humerus, your arm bone? It's superficial because here's the arm skin, and here's the humerus in the middle, and then here's the bicep on the front. It's actually two because biceps, two heads, but we'll get there. So the biceps is both superficial to the bone and deep to the skin at the same time. So again, these are relative terms. Okay, now let's talk about the planes and sections. So these planes and sections are useful mostly in imaging, where like a CAT scan takes a virtual section. If you were in cadaver lab, you might take a bone saw and cut a body in these planes and sections. But normally we're talking about, like, this is no, it's an MRI. So a CAT scan or MRI image where you're getting virtual slices of the body. And we need to be able to say which of we've got three colors here, purple and blue and green, which of these three major directions we're taking images of the body. So first we have the horizontal plane, and the horizon, which is in the word horizontal there, is where the sky meets the sea. Sea, sky. Ha! And I said I couldn't draw. Ha! Okay, so so it's on the horizon. This way. Line it up. There we go. This way. And so this divides the body into superior and inferior portions. And it could be in the head, in the neck, anywhere in the body. It's just that it goes this direction. And it divides the body into a superior and inferior portion. It is a horizontal or transverse plane. It is sometimes also called a cross section. And then you see apple there. If you do a horizontal section of an apple, then you get a little 5-sided star of seeds. So the horizontal section of an apple will look like this. Oh, it's fun. You should try it. If you haven't ever cut an apple horizontally, it makes a little star. So cute. They're fun when you dry them that way. Okay, a vertical plane. So the opposite is horizontal. The opposite of horizontal is vertical. Vertical is up and down. And we're going to break the vertical down into two different planes, this direction and this direction. So let's do frontal first. The frontal or coronal, C-O-R-O-N-A-L, coronal plane, divides the body into anterior and posterior sections. So a vertical plane of an apple there you go. If I can draw it, all y'all can draw it. Vertical section. The sagittal section. Sagittal section is this blue one, and it divides the body into left and right portions. There are two types of sagittal sections. There's a mid-sagittal section, and this one is the mid-sagittal plane, and it divides the body into equal left and right portions. And so our apple pick here will look just like, yeah, just like our frontal apple pick, but from a different direction. Yeah, whatever. You get it. Okay, so this is equal left and right portions. Let's see if we have a picture. No. Okay, so if we did this cut, say we needed a picture of the shoulder. So what do you get in a mid-sagittal picture? You get the brain, the spinal cord, oral and nasal cavities, you get the heart, and you get intestines, you get the urinary bladder. Do you get an arm in a mid-sagittal section? No, arms aren't in the blue plane. Do you get a leg in a mid-sagittal section? Nope, no legs. But you do get things like hearts and all those mid-sagittal organs. Okay, so a parasagittal organ, say you needed an image of a shoulder, then you need or a knee, then you need a parasagittal section, and that divides the body into unequal left and right portions. So that would be if you sliced the apple and got this, because you sliced not down the middle of the, there we go, not down the middle of the apple, but off the side of the middle of the apple and got just a little chunk off the end. Okay. So what is a cross-section? A cross-section is another word for a vertical or transverse section. All right. Noisily turning to page 7. Body cavities. All right, and this continues our lab material. I think I forgot to put the, yeah, I didn't put a timer on this time. Yeah, we're probably good. Body cavities. Okay, terms to know. The thoracic cavity is everything superior to the diaphragm. Oh, the body cavities are spaces in the body that are covered in membranes with organs in them. I had a better definition for that, but I don't have it right now. So the serous membranes, the serosa, are the membranes in the ventral body cavity. The dorsal body cavity has a 3-layered membrane called meninges, and we'll learn that when we get to neuro at the very end of the semester for lab 4 and lecture test 5. Okay, the thoracic cavity, as we said, is the thorax. It's where the ribs are. It's everything north superior to the diaphragm. The abdominopelvic cavity is everything inferior to the diaphragm. I don't know why I don't have a picture here. And the diaphragm is the muscle that separates the thoracic cavity and the abdominopelvic cavity. This is a lab term, and it does have a silent letter that is absolutely necessary for you to get credit for spelling this word on the lab. So it's diaphragm. So if you can't remember what the silent letter is or where it goes, then we will pronounce for spelling, which is diaphragm. If that's what it takes to remember it, that's what we will do. Because if you skip this G, you get 0 credit. I do generally give partial credit for within a letter misspellings, but this is not one of them, because if you don't put the G in diaphragm, you look like you don't know what you're talking about. And y'all are my students now, and my students know what they're talking about. So you're gonna put the G. Can you tell us a pet peeve? Will it count against you on your grade if you forget it? Anytime there's like the one letter that can make something completely wrong, I'll tell you about it. So there won't be hidden. You will know. All right, body cavities. We already talked about that. The spaces inside the body. Oh, there's a picture. Okay. So let's draw. Here's the ventral body cavity. Ventral. And then about here is the diaphragm. Not sure where the edge is. There it is. We found the edge at the end of the M. Diaphragm. Okay. And then below the diaphragm, above the diaphragm is the thoracic body cavity. And below the diaphragm, I'm going to put it over here where I got more room to write, is the abdominopelvic. Pelvic. So you'll find often in science where they have two word roots, they put an O in between them and smush them together, and boom, you got a new word. So the more word roots you know, the more of these random two roots put together with an O between them, you know when you first look at them. Okay. All right, so we've got this whole thing's the ventral body cavity. It's divided by a skeletal muscle called the diaphragm that has a sneaky silent letter G, which is the next to last letter. And everything superior to the diaphragm is the thoracic body cavity, and everything inferior to the diaphragm is the abdominopelvic body cavity. Okay, so inside the thoracic body cavity are your left, you know what, can I? Wait, let me erase that. Can I erase? Is there an eraser? I'm gonna switch. Oh, ooh, that was fun. Okay, let's go back to the pen. Wait, pen. And we're gonna switch colors. What color do we want for the lungs? You know what, yellow would show up nicely on this dark. Okay, so this is where the left lung lives, and it is the left pleural cavity. And these are all lab terms. This is all lab stuff you need to know. Again, we normally don't have time. Oh, that was the edge cavity. Okay. And then this is the right pleural cavity. Okay, again, I am terrible at writing with a mouse. I mean, my handwriting leaves much to be desired, but with a mouse that's magnified. Okay, do we have an orange? Wait, that's not what that's not what I, orange? Nope. Okay, great. So everything in between the two lungs is an area, it's not a body cavity because it doesn't have its own serous membrane. And it's the mediastinum. It's an A. That's not better. Stinum. Mediastinum. mediastinum. Okay, and that's everything in between the two lungs. And that includes another body cavity. We're going back to red because we're talking about the heart now, so it's just more fun in red. And this is the, that's not what a heart looks like, and I can't draw, so we're going with it. This is the pericardial cavity. So peri, P-E-R-I, means around. Like a periscope, you put up your periscope and you see all the way around. Peri means around. And cardium, cardio, C-A-R-D-I-U-M. So cardio means heart. So this is around the heart. So this is the pericardium, the pericardi, let's do that, pericardial cavity. Okay, so the thoracic body cavity contains the left and right pleural cavities, which contain the lungs, and the pericardial cavity, which surrounds the heart. Technically, they surround the lungs. Technically. And the pericardial cavity is in the mediastinum, which is not a body cavity because it doesn't have its own serous membrane. It's just the area, and I don't want to say space because it's not like an empty space. It's not like a, like there's no like loose air bubbles floating around or anything. There's like, I mean, there's air, but only in the trachea, but again, we'll get there. So the mediastinum is the area between the two lungs, and it contains the pericardium, the pericardial cavity, which surrounds the heart. Okay. All right, so the abdominopelvic cavity is bounded, the bony pelvis sits outside the pelvic cavity. And the area, and it's kind of hip height in the back, but then a little lower in the front, so it's not, it's angled. Anyway, below this line is more or less the pelvic cavity. And above this line is more or less the abdominal cavity. I'm simplifying, but that's a basic concept. There is a serous membrane. We're going with green. There is a serous membrane that takes up most of the abdominal cavity and maybe half the pelvic cavity. And this membrane is called the I don't know if there's room over there to write it, so P, that's a P. E-A-L? Yeah, E-A-L, peritoneal cavity. So the peritoneal cavity is defined by the peritoneum, which is the serous membrane, the double-layered serous membrane in the abdominal pelvic cavity. So anything contained inside this peritoneal area is peritoneal cavity, although there's a different technical definition, so we'll cover that. And that's most of the abdominal body cavity and about half of the pelvic cavity. And so while the abdominal cavity, abdominopelvic is everything inferior to the diaphragm. Abdominal is more or less everything above hip level, above the top of these hip bones. And pelvic is everything inside the hip level, although it's kind of squishes in, you know, it shows it better in the picture. We've got a picture on the next page. But the peritoneal cavity is based on this membrane. Okay, and we have the term retroperitoneal. No, seriously, do we? Okay, we're adding the term retroperitoneal. Things that are retroperitoneal are things that are behind the peritoneal membrane. These will include things like the kidneys, the adrenal glands, the pancreas. And then these things that are below the peritoneal membrane are infraperitoneal. And this will include things like the uterus, the urinary bladder, the ovaries, fallopian tubes, that kind of stuff. prostate. That's all infraperitoneal, which is below the peritoneal cavity. Retro means back, so these are posterior to the peritoneal membrane. Okay, next page, next slide. I'm in the way again. There we go, I'm out of the way. All right, what separates the ventral body cavity, also called the coelom, C-O-E-L-O-M, C-O-E-L always means like a space, into the superior thoracic cavity and inferior abdominopelvic cavity? Answers the diaphragm, if you're pronouncing for spelling. Each body cavity is lined with a double-layered serous membrane. And are we filling in the Noteset here? The inner layer of the serous membrane touching the viscera is the visceral layer, and this we hadn't talked about yet. The serous membrane is a double-layered membrane, and there's not a difference between the two layers. They're made of the same stuff, but since it is folded over, they are named for their location. So the deep layer is touching the viscera. Your viscera are your guts, so this is the visceral layer. And the outer superficial layer is the parietal layer. I don't know if I've warned you about all the P's, but there's way too many P's in this area. So the different body cavities that we talked about each have a double layer, and I'm in the way again. So we will have the visceral pleura touching the lung and the parietal pleura surrounding that. We'll have the visceral pericardium touching the heart and the parietal pericardium surrounding that. The visceral peritoneum will be touching things like the stomach, the liver, the small intestines, no, not really large intestines, sort of. And then the parietal peritoneum will actually line the inside of the body wall. It'll be touching the muscles of like your abdomen, like those internal muscles, the deep muscles. Okay. All right, that finishes page 7. And we started with page 6, and this is probably entirely enough for one video. I have no idea how long I've been talking, so we will call it good. All right, so this has been ANP 1, lecture test 1, video 4. So thank you as always for tuning in. The education must go on. Dr. J out.